Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, David Lesondak. So David is known for his work in Fascia. I believe it was recommended to me for the show by Gary Carter. He's a yoga teacher we had on the show, a friend of mine in that work. He is at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. We'll say a little bit more about the exact part of that. And he's also author of various books, including on fascia, what it is and why it matters. Did I get that right, David?
Yes, you got that right.
Boom. I'm pretty tired today, so you have to excuse me if I'm a bit groggy and exhausted. I'm exhausted from Feldenkrais, of all things. So
you're a bit knackered.
I'm knackered. Good. You've got the Britishisms down. You've been hanging out with Gary.
Yeah, and if I say them and they're shite, I want you to tell me.
That's good. You can swear on here. That's allowed. So okay. Tell us about the beginning of your journey. How did you get interested in the body?
Mm-hmm. It was something... I grew up in an underwear house.
Right. Okay. Well, what is that?
No. I can remember, it's weird. It wasn't, my family was just very comfortable. We weren't a huggy family. We weren't like this physical family. We were always putting our arms in each other, hugging everything. But I can remember being like 12 or 14 and my mother came out of the bathroom. She had taken a bath and she was walking down to the bedroom in her underwear. And one of my buddies like freaked out. And I'm like, yeah, there's a problem with this. So when I really think about it, my father was a steel worker. My mother would get rubbing alcohol and cotton swabs and like alcohol his back to get the grime out and kind of do some massage along the way. She used to scratch my back when I was agitated to calm me down. So from a very early age, there was this sense of tactile expression in the body and that being a good thing. So in a really very real way, I feel like that was kind of hardwired into me at a young age. And in my late teens through my mid-20s, I had various different lifetimes and careers, working in television production, working in advertising, working in a funeral home and an embalming lab for an 8-location funeral home, phone sales. But the one consistency was that, what's the matter? Oh, my shoulder. Oh, here, let me see what I can do there. And I would just instinctively want to put my hands on people in an appropriate way and do something to make that better. So after a while, I realized, oh, there's this thing called massage therapy. I should look into what that is because maybe that's a good way to earn a crust. While I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my life as a writer, as a musician, as an artiste, which I thought that would be. And it turned out that that became my career. And when I discovered fascia, yes, I discovered fascia. When I discovered the relevance of fascia in my own body as somebody who was developing repetitive motion problems, and then therapeutically as a provider of that, there was no going back.
Great. And you've collaborated with Tom Myers, who's a fairly well-known name in this field, right?
Yes. I taught for him for any number of years, and we worked together. If you've seen any of the dissection video footage of the anatomy trains, that was the biggest collaboration that Tom and I did, was putting those videos together on the fly in the lab, while we were actually doing the dissections. When I look back on it, it was incredible. And by the same time, it was incredible that we never rehearsed a single one of those things. We're just like, okay, we got 10 minutes. Let's do a video.
Okay, so probably start with the question I'm sure you get asked. Let's get it over and done with. What is fascia?
Okay. Fascia is the connective tissue matrix of the human body. It is comprised of both a fibrous part and a fluid part. The fibrous part is primarily collagen based. Think about wrapping postal twine, very strong, has some flexibility, but not too much. And the fluid part, which is a series of sugars, sulfates, and proteins that kind of is thicker and frankly a bit snotty. Now, this fascia in sheaths covers, interpenetrates every muscle, every bone, every nerve, and every organ. So it is literally the scaffolding, the inner scaffolding on which every other part of your body is built and maintained.
So this thin, strong sacs of this stuff that you'll find around muscles, but also coating bones, and right down to a very small level, it's there, right? So there's this idea that if you stripped everything else away, the fascia would still show the shape of a human body.
Yes, it would, just as the circulatory system does. Have you ever been to Body Worlds?
Yes.
Okay, right. So you've seen, yeah. Were you there? He was just there when he was just there.
Not the latest one, but I've spent a bit of time before at them.
Okay, yeah, but yeah. Anyway, Mark, in the Body Worlds, there's that family, and it's just the circulatory system. And you can clearly see the woman, you can clearly see the man, you can clearly see the features and the contours of their bodies. It's the same thing with the connective tissue system, with the fascia, and probably also the nerves as well. But nobody's done a fine dissection of the nerves that way.
Right. And the thing is, we've all seen this, right? Like anyone who's eaten meat has seen fascia. Like we understand,
yeah.
Actually, like that's one example I give for people is that it's this sort of white stuff that you might find on the outside of a piece of chicken, or
the best thing I think is a piece of spiral cut ham.
Okay,
because it's got more of the white woven in through the pinky meaty parts, and that's a little more accurate to how it. I mean, if you kind of did a cross section of your own leg, it would probably look like that spiral cut piece of ham. But yeah, and generally speaking, it's a little gristly, it's a little chewier. We don't necessarily always eat it when we find it in our meat, for those of us listening who are meat eaters. But you're seeing it not in its optimal condition. And even in medicine, in the cadaver lab, in a preserved specimen, it's about as interesting as greasy insulation.
Mm-hmm.
But in a living person, it's very biodynamic. You can pull on it and it will come with you. It looks like it has spit bubbles in foam inside of it, and so on and so forth.
Great. I mean, this is really an interesting point, isn't it? That a lot of our knowledge of human anatomy comes from a few hundred years ago, hasn't been updated much. And certain things have missed out. Like this was the stuff that was just sort of annoyingly in the way of the real anatomy that people just kind of cut away and threw away.
Correct. If you talk to a hunter, they'll refer to the fascia as the silver skin. So when they're dressing the animal to prepare it for cooking, they cut away the silver skin, and then they get to the muscles and the bones and the organs and the things that they then want to do with. And it was very much the same thing in medical anatomy. It was just in the way of the stuff they wanted to look at, with some exceptions. So, for example, where the infamous IT band is. Okay, if you cut that away entirely, it would lose some of its stability. And the IT band, from the fascial standpoint, is much, much thicker. It's much more strap-like because it's not meant to stretch. It's meant to hold you up when you're walking on two legs. So the idea that you need to stretch and lengthen your IT band is frankly a fool's errand. It's not meant to do that.
So for listeners who maybe don't have so much anatomy training, this is the sort of tough part on the outside of the leg that people might try and foam roll. And I also heard something fascinating that people that ride a lot of horses have one on the inside of their thigh.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to bring that up too. And people who ride horses enough, that thick part on the outside will get spongier and less thick, and they will develop it on the inside. And in fact, that if you okay, everybody listening at home right now, go ahead, put your hand in your crotch. It's okay. And go towards the inside of the thigh. And you're going to feel like a little twangy thing, like a really thick guitar string. That's your adductor longus tendon. And if you ride horses sufficiently long enough for enough years, that tendon will mineralize and become like a bone. And the IT band on the outside will be spongy and just like any other soft tissue system. And then you probably want to roll that IT band out, but not for most of us who don't ride horses.
Now, this brings up an interesting thing. It's like, one, are anatomy two interesting things for me. One, anatomy is standardized. And yes, it has to show fascia in certain places like the lower back or the IT band, because it just wouldn't fit together otherwise. But that's a standardized body that's been doing a certain thing. Whereas for me, the interesting thing about fascia is that it's how we adapt, right? Like this cowboy who gets it on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. It is highly adaptive. I used to describe it as like an envelope for each muscle. And depending on the relative thickness or pliability of that envelope has something to do with the way the muscle itself can grow or be utilized by the body. That's kind of I don't use that explanation so much anymore, because within that envelope of fascia, every single muscle fiber has its own individual sheath of fascia inside it. So it's really much more beautifully elegant and complex in that nature. And from the perspective of the fascia, it's not like there's 637 separate envelopes for each muscle. It's just one continuous organ, if you will, that's ensheathing all of the muscles, that is, shall we say, heat sealed down in 1,200 odd places that we call origins and insertions for these 637 muscles. Give or take.
And the adaptation piece is a blessing and a curse, right? So on the one hand, it enables us to stand up or ride a horse or whatever, but it also
skill.
Anything at all, right? Because it makes us stronger across certain planes of movement.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair to say? Like, tell me.
Yes, that is. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Depending on how you use your body, you will develop more collagen to support certain things that you're doing. So if you're doing a lot of standing, if you're a power lifter and you're doing those amazing kind of lifts with those heavy barbells, you're going to develop more collagen to support that activity. So in that case, it's brilliantly adaptive. Where it's less brilliantly adaptive is when we're injured, because while you're recovering from your injury, your support system changes. So if I've injured one leg, my support from the opposite leg is going to change until that injury is over. And it's not that that's not the brilliant part. That is kind of brilliant. But in our rehab protocols, we tend to look at the injured place and we don't look at how the rest of the body is adapting around the injury. They just say, well, okay, your knee's fixed. You're back to 120 degrees of flexion or whatever it is. You're fine. But you've had 9 months of favoring that knee for that injury or that knee replacement. And then 9 months after that, you're like, why am I having problems on the other side of my body now?
Yeah, because it's one system, so there's always going to be an adaptation. As Eric does this thing of like having clothes, and so if I twist here, it pulls across, or twist one part of my t-shirt, it pulls across the whole thing. There's a sort of spider's web like quality to it.
Yeah, that's so if you're listening at home, if you just take your shirt and you pull the front of your shirt, you're going to feel it in the back of your neck, right? So that's often the way fascia works in terms of perception of the person versus my reality as a clinician when I'm dealing with somebody with pain, is I'm looking at, okay, so you have a tightness here, you have a problem in this area. What's causing it? So when somebody says, I have piriformis syndrome, which is the strap-like muscle underneath the gluteus maximus, it's one of the underglutes, as I call them. Well, okay, why is that piriformis tight? We can whale away on the piriformis and make it feel better for an hour or a day, but that doesn't necessarily change the problem if it's been going on for months or years. Same with any other syndrome that you're having musculoskeletally in the body. Why is that? We need to look and we need to analyze anatomically what else is going on to create that problem.
Yeah. And this is maybe the interesting thing for a lot of our listeners, is that this is the Embodiment podcast. People are interested in embodiment, psychotherapists call it character structure, for example, armoring. There's different terms that really are different terms for this, but fascia is the how of how we get shaped. And sometimes just physical, right? Like we're sitting in chairs right now. Mm-hmm. Like many people sitting in chairs means that fascia is building up in certain areas, becoming strong in certain areas, weak in certain areas. If we're doing this 8 hours a day, when we jump up and go to do something else over months, years, I guess, tell me if the time frames are right, we've actually put on like a sort of inner suit that holds us into that seating shape. So it's actually going to be some sort of effort or stretch to not be in that shape.
Essentially, in its simplest terms, you are correct there. You're absolutely correct, Mark. But if we get up out of our chairs and we go, and shoot, spend an hour playing American basketball, or we go to a good yoga class 2 or 3 times a week, then we're less likely to become our adaptations. If we are embodying the way we sit. So right now I'm sitting at my dining room table, and my feet are flat on the ground. I'm sitting forward on my chair. I've got a nice curve in my lumbar, and I'm sitting on my ischotuberosities. The sits bones, as they sometimes refer to them, are actually pointing back, which gives me a more upright posture. I'm not back and slumped. So after a while we're talking, I might start to slump backwards, and I start to feel something's not right. I can check in and go, oh, wait, I need to be back up on my sit bones more, and be sitting in better form. Form dictates function. And if your form is bad and you're doing a lot of bad form, you're going to have problems somewhere down the road. And you're right. 6 months, 9 months, year and a half, 2 years later.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
That's about the timeline, depending on the area of the body and the severity of what you're doing.
Now, in a way, what I've learned from fascial stuff is that any form done excessively is bad. Like even yoga, yoga's good. Let's all do yoga, but a lot of yoga is just pushing movements. Sun salutations, backwards and forwards, vinyasas. It's not actually pretty limited compared to. We had a guy on the show, Rafe Kelly, who gets people climbing trees, and he has people wrestling and running and climbing trees and rolling on the floor. And there's so many different little movements in that.
Mm-hmm. I grew up with trees, and I used to climb them all the time. And that, I love my weekly yoga, but the place I go to, we do a lot of twists and spirals. We don't just do a lot of anterior, A to P flexion extension type sun salutation moves. We do a lot of twists and rotations. And if I'm somewhere out of town teaching and I go to a yoga class and we don't have many twists in the yoga class, I walk out of there feeling very two-dimensional when it's over. Like I got And if you're climbing, if you're wrestling, if you're playing a sport, I can't think of a single sport that doesn't involve spiral motions as part of it. That's essential. So anything that we do physically, our workouts, should include a big spiral component to it, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's not just limiting in backwards and forwards linear way, which is building fascia up in certain directions, but actually making us sort of weaker and injury prone in others, like any kind of limited movement done repeatedly in a very simple way without the complexity and the chaos and the spirals and all that other kind of stuff.
Exactly. And like my friends in Germany like to say, who've been very big in incorporating fascial techniques into their athletic training, is it's not like, we're doing training wrong. It's just like it's been a three-legged table. So we've had our conditioning, our strength building part of it. We've had our cardiovascular part of it, and then we have the more neuromuscular part of it, which would be what your sport is, whether it's rock climbing or playing football or cricket or what have you, that involves a certain particular type of skill to attain a goal or a task. But the fourth component to that is something to build up resilience and resilience in the fascial network, which is very, very important, and that's the fourth leg of the table. Because most of those sports injuries, when there's a tear, it's in the white fascia. Very rarely are there real avulsions of the muscle and bone.
Right. So say those four again.
Okay. So you have your strength and conditioning, which would be your weightlifting.
Yeah.
You have your cardiovascular, which would be your running or your elliptical machine or anything that gets your heart rate up. You have your specific I call it neuromuscular training. So whether that's playing tennis or doing yoga or cricket, but the sport or rock climbing, the thing that you really like to do that builds your skills to do that thing better. But then you also have to have a couple of days a week, a little bit of fascial training to kind of bring a little more resiliency and bounce to the fascia. And you were talking about embodiment, which is definitely something I want to talk in a little bit more deeply. But I want to be sure that we're done with this topic before we move on.
Just to finish on this, so what exactly is fascial training then? Does that mean it's kind of slow, mindful, like the Feldenkrais stuff I was doing today? Or?
That's part of it. That's part of it. And I would argue that you should always be mindful whether you're doing cardio work or bench pressing. You should be feeling and listening and paying attention to your body as opposed to watching TV. But the hallmarks of the fascia type training involve a little slower, a little more refined movements, but also changes in angle and changes in speed. So let me give you an example. If I was doing lat pull downs, okay, and I'm sitting on the bench and I check myself in, and I'm not slumped. I'm in a good posture, and I'm doing my lat pull downs. I would do one normally, and then I might turn about 10 degrees to my left and do another one, and then turn 20 degrees to my left and do another one. And I would try to work all the planes of movement within that lat pull down, as opposed to just doing them that one way only. And then every 5 or 6, I might put a little bounce in there. I might pull down a little bit harder and let it recoil back up. Okay. And that takes rhythm in timing. One of the best cardiovascular exercises to bring more spring and resilience to your fascial net is skipping. We don't skip when we're adults. When we're a kid, it's natural. It's fun. Try to be depressed when you're skipping. It's not possible.
Yeah, there's an embodiment piece in there.
It's a beautiful embodiment piece. But I have to tell you, I feel self-conscious skipping down the street as a 55-year-old adult.
I like to go to the trampoline with my niece at her house and jump up and down on the trampoline with her, and you can't help but smile when there's that much sort of up.
Exactly. But the trampoline doesn't work your fascia.
No, why not?
Because the recoil and the bounce is coming from the trampoline, but it's the same principle. So when you're skipping, that bounce, that recoil that you get from the trampoline, you're getting naturally from the fascia in the glutes, from the springiness of the plantar fascia, and so on. Yeah, trampolining is great for your muscles and it's great for your mood, but it's not really a fascial trainer.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about embodiment and sort of fascia and personality then, in that case. Character, motion.
You have been reading your Feldenkrais.
This show is, lots of people get geek out on fascia, and it does have a way of people sort of get obsessed with fascia. Actually, there's sort of symposiums on it, and
I wouldn't know anything about that. I just heard about
books on it. Like, it's something that's either ignored or obsessed with, isn't it? Actually, before we go into embodiment, let's touch on this.
Sure.
Why are there fascial geeks in a way they're not ligament geeks or synovial?
Well, I would say that the ligaments are part of the fascial system.
The fascia network. Okay.
But I hear what you're saying. You
know what I mean? Like, why is it such a thing? And don't get me wrong, I like Danny Carey's classes and stuff, and hearing him talk about it.
I was a card-carrying fascia geek for 15, 16, 18 years. And it's so much a part of who I am now, I almost don't even think about it. And sometimes I have to take a break from it. But I think what was exciting about it to me, and I think what captures people's imaginations about it, is how inclusive it is, how it begins to explain observations we've made about the body that we've not had convincing explanations for previously. But by the same token, we have to watch that we don't use it to explain everything. Oh, why am I feeling that? Well, because fascia, but I can be working deep in somebody's calf along their tibialis posterior, and they can say, wow, I feel that up in the front of my hip, or wow, my jaw's really tight when you press there. And I could say, well, that's because in fascial anatomy land, I can hypothesize and more than hypothesize, but show the tensional connection between that deep calf muscle and the masseter in the jaw, because we've mapped those connections out. We've dissected using fascia-sparing dissections like Gary Carter. We've dissected out those force transmission continuities. So, that whole, everything is connected. It's true, but it's much cooler when you know how it's all connected.
Right, yeah. It's not just abstract.
You can begin to interact with it in a meaningful way. And I think that's why that's one of the reasons I geeked out so much, because I went, oh, here's a chance to really, really standardize these observations I've been making and things I've been seeing about the way things are connected into ways that can be repeated from person to person to person and get better, faster, more consistent results. So that's the part of me that really geeked out about it. And because there's still so much to learn about it, it's a very wide open field. It's a little bit like astronomy. In astronomy, you can be an amateur astronomer and discover a new star and be accepted by astrophysicists, because there's that amateur quality to astronomy that anybody can participate in. And that's true, I think, of fascia science as well.
Yeah. So
You don't have to have
exciting, isn't it? It's
a
exciting.
PhD in cellular biology to participate.
And sometimes it's almost in given these almost mystical qualities, because there is some pretty unusual, is it like piezoelectricity or this unusual sort of potential communication things that are going on through it. And it seems like some people use this almost as an explanatory explanation for all sorts of mystical concepts or alternative things. I don't know the truth of it myself, but it definitely seems to grab people in that way.
Yeah, I don't know the truth of that myself either. I've experienced some of those mystical things in a way. I've also experienced some mystical things in Shavasana, quite frankly. Not, but I think we also have to be careful that, whatever your flavor of spirituality is, that we don't just say, again, because fascia. Oh, I just had a spiritual experience on your table. That must be because fascia. Well, maybe not. But there is definitely something that engenders, to me, a deeper connection with one's own body. And in doing so, if you're willing to go there, a deeper connection with one's own self that happens when you're working with fascia, with a good, skilled, sensitive fascial therapist, that I don't find with other body-centered modalities. Maybe we can segue into the embodiment part here.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, having a felt sense of the connectedness in a literal, non-abstract sense between different parts of you. For me, this is a different embodiment than seeing yourself as a collection of isolated bits that just put this bit pulls on that bit kind of thing.
Right. So here's a real simple therapeutic example. So just the other day, I needed to loosen up somebody's shoulder near the spine, somewhere around the second or third thoracic vertebrae. So I slipped my hand underneath past their shoulder blade and popped my fingers up to kind of be in that gully between the spinous process, the sticky outy bit, and the erector spinae, the long back muscles alongside. They were on their back, so I had the compression. I found the angle that let me kind of get in between there. And then their knees were up, and I had them slowly, very Feldenkrais-ian, move their knees back and forth like windscreen wipers, or windshield wipers for you folks from the States listening. And that put a whole very subtle rotation going in through their whole spine. So they're doing that movement. I'm gauging the pliability of the tissue underneath it. And they've got to pay attention to what's going on. And their part of their brain is also processing, oh, when I move my hips and legs this way, there's a subtle rotation in my spine that happens. So they start making connections that don't even necessarily involve thought, at least not the way that you and I would geek out about it, about how their body's connected and how it moves together. And then they get up and they move around. And it's a slightly different experience than just a passive treatment where, like, oh yeah, that feels better. They have a better felt sense of where it feels better, why it feels better, and how their body is one interconnected organism. And it gets us out of that parts mentality.
Yeah.
So it's got us into a lot of problems.
Yeah. So it's experiential. It's also empowering.
Was that too much of an answer?
No, it's great. I'm just trying to take it apart a little bit. There's a sort of identity piece in there, almost like an ontological piece about who I am, not just I am being done to, and a different sense of self-identity, at least on the physical level, which creates changes in other ways.
Very succinctly put. Very succinctly put. And sometimes, I'm not saying that passive work is wrong either. I might have somebody who's in a series of treatments with me show up at my door, having had an unbelievably stressful time in between sessions, and for various good reasons. So am I going to say, well, okay, we really need to straighten out your psoas now and level off your pelvis? No, this might be the exact wrong time to do that. They just need to chill out. And we need to just do parasympathetic things, get some healthy vagal tone going again, and just kind of get them in a place where they're going to be more receptive to life rather than being stressed out by it. So I just want to be clear. It's a both and here. It's not either or.
Quick interruption to tell you about my book, Embodiment. Creatively named, hey? Actually, Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness. You can find this online at theembodimentbook.com. That's theembodimentbook.com. So this book is an introduction to the whole field. If you like these interviews, you'll probably love this book. Funny stuff, poems, personal stories from my life, illustrating what embodiment's all about, and loads for professionals in the field too. Top teaching tips, language tips, that kind of thing. Yeah, a real condensation of everything I've learned about embodiment, basically. So you can get pre-orders at Amazon.com, and if you just put in Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness, that's the name of the book, or go to theembodimentbook.com. On there, you'll see quotes from various teachers, a bunch of fun illustrations, and you can also get the first chapter completely free online at theembodimentbook.com. Enjoy, and back to the interview. Let's talk about the sort of personality stuff, the emotional piece here then. So, we could look at fascia as kind of how our personality is held in place from an embodiment point of view.
Okay. So what's your perspective on that? Let me understand where you're coming from with that, so I can meet you in the middle there.
Well, I think a standard embodiment point of view is that our bodies don't just express who we are, they're partially creating it. They're partially responsible for how we hold ourselves, how we're held together, our manner of being, in our posture, our breathing, etc. Our movement is not just an expression of how we are, but creates how we are to some extent. That's an embodied view on personality and character. And in the same way as when we see people who have certain shapes, someone that, it could be an extreme example, I think no one would disagree with, someone who's been traumatized and they've got a certain fight-flight response that's just stuck in their system.
Right. And that, you just keyed on the most important word, stuck. And when something is stuck, there's always a fascial component. When something's stuck physically, that's the perfect time for a fascia man to sweep in and a fascia woman to sweep in and do their thing. But likewise too, there can be an emotional stuckness to that. So the old classic Charlie Brown cartoon about when you're depressed, you feel better when you're standing in a depressed posture, which is with the sunken chest and the head's kind of bent down and your shoulders are kind of forward, and in it's a very protecting of the heart kind of maneuver. Now, that's fine if you're mourning, that's where you should be. But if you stay that way too long, suddenly that is you. And I love it when I get a referral from a psychologist or a psychiatrist saying, I think some physical body work might help you open up and get past some of this emotional trauma that you're trying to get through. And I love working with people on that level, as long as they know that I'm not their talk therapist. I mean, I'm happy to know about
it's complementary, right? There's no reason, if the fascia shapes people to be stuck in an emotion, whether it's anger or sadness or something which just isn't helpful to be in all the time, as any emotion isn't, that actually it could be even be excitement. Someone stuck in woo the whole time. That's not going to be great.
Yeah, we've all met those people too, and they're
right. Yeah, I've got a PT like that. She's far too enthusiastic at 7:30 in the morning. God love her, but she's in the right job at least. So anyway, so the fascia can kind of stick people in those emotional states, and I'd say having that as a complement to talk therapy or medication or whatever else people needs to actually help their body shift out of that emotional state.
Exactly, to be able to regulate it better. Absolutely. And then we bring in the training part of that. So I might have a breakthrough with my psychotherapist about my intractable depression, but my body is still stuck
Right.
in
Yeah.
that depressed posture. And moreover, that's become part of my structure because I literally cannot physically move out of it.
Right.
So no matter how great that revelation is, the body might drag me back into it.
Mm.
So if I go to somebody and get that loose and available to me, and they can show me how to keep it available to me in terms of posture, in terms of movement availability, or I'm going to a good, a good physical class of whatever it is, then I can learn how to use it better. So if I feel myself getting stuck, I can get out of it again. And I don't need the talk therapist. I don't necessarily need David to come and unstick that for me. I can learn how to unstick myself.
I guess we get kind of a chicken and egg there thing, and I guess it's always bi-directional is probably the answer. But
Yeah.
you see this kind of like correlation between personality types as well? I mean, there's people that I look at and you just got a sense, okay, the fascia's holding them in a certain way. There's going to be a certain character that I'm meeting here. And I guess, you know what I mean? You just see the shape up front and then the behavior follows.
Yeah, I do, but I try not to prejudge that. I make a note of that impression, clinically, therapeutically, and I just try to say, okay, let's see if that's right here. It's just like whenever I meet somebody, or I not meet somebody, but whenever I have a new patient come in and I get their paperwork, I never look at their birth date.
Right, because you don't want to know that. You don't want to be...
Yeah, I've got some people I'm treating now in their 80s who may as well be in their 40s for
Right.
how they come at life, and people in their 40s who are, like the quintessential old man. But getting a little more back on target, there's also the baseline nervous system component. So when I'm seeing that place that they're stuck, okay, is that the fascia, or is that just a baseline of tension in their nervous system that they can't shut off, like that fluorescent light bulb that has that buzz in it in the office that nobody changes, and it just is there for weeks. And finally, when they change it, everybody relaxes because that buzzing that you got used to is gone. So I've occasionally had people that I've treated that on a biomechanical fascial level, we've done a lot of things to make changes, but there's some baseline tension holding them in a place of nervousness and pain that is outside of my field of expertise to deal with. That is probably, I don't want to speculate because it's individual from person to person to person. But there's something else that's driving that baseline tension that keeps them from expressing themselves as freely as they could. And that's where I bow out, because I'm not going to be your spiritual counselor. I'm not going to be your psychologist. I've studied some of those things, but I know where my limits are.
It's important to know the scope of our practice, isn't it? Like, I'm a coach, I don't do therapy. Or and I don't do physical therapy either. I'll say, go to Gary and get body work if I was there, and say, okay, you've got pain. I don't really do pain. Go to David. He can work with that. If there's a psychosomatic component, I can help. But you might want to have it looked at by a doctor, or, do you know what I mean? Like, knowing the scope of our work, I think, is really important for our...
Yeah, exactly. And I'm fortunate to work in a university hospital situation where I've got access to good doctors and good people to refer to. Sometimes, there's that old thing about, it's bone on bone. And I got to tell you, a lot of times it isn't bone on bone, but I also got to tell you, I know what bone on bone sounds like.
Sorry, I don't know what you mean by that.
There is a very specific feel under your hands. There's a very specific kind of, it almost feels like an audible scraping when they're moving.
Ew. So bone on bone, sorry, that's when there's the cartilage or something is disintegrated.
The cartilage is just completely gone. I mean, in the case I'm thinking about, it was in the glenohumeral joint, which is like the washer where the humerus bone connects into the scapula, was completely gone. And it just feels like a rubbing that shouldn't be. And it's a very distinctive sensation that has a strangely audible vibratory component to it.
Listen, you've sort of enlivened the 12-year-old in me. And I'm wondering if there's any other extreme cases that might be illustrative or interesting that you've come across in relation to fascia that might bring some of the themes out.
Wow.
Weirdest thing you've seen or most extreme case in a fascial environment?
Oh goodness, that's a lot of years to go back there. And what's funny when I get asked this question, I think about the ones that got away.
Mm-hmm.
Are the ones that, and I also think about the ones that were extraordinary. So, for example, I'm thinking of this one person in particular. I can still like close my eyes and kind of see what she looked like, because when I'm working with folks, they don't wear dressing gowns. They're in shorts and an appropriate top or underwear if they're comfortable with it, because I need to see what's going on. This particular person had been hit by a car going 70 miles an hour as a pedestrian. Okay, so she wasn't in another vehicle when it happened, and she had a replacement eyeball, a couple of replacement joints. She was missing the majority of the quadriceps on one of her legs. So she sort of looked like that second plate in the anatomy book where you see the deeper muscles of the legs. There was a lot that she didn't have anymore, but how we were able to work with and change how she used what she had to work with was tremendous fun. It was a challenge too.
Because there was sort of less there was this unusual anatomy now.
Yeah. Or somebody who had a tug flap procedure, which is where there's a radical mastectomy and they take tissue from somewhere else to sort of build up a more natural breast as opposed to like an insert that goes into a brassiere to give the appearance of a breast. So they took her gracilis muscle. They took her gracilis muscle, which is one of the muscles of the inner thigh. It's very long and bandular like corduroy. And they took off both of those muscles from her thighs and they used that to build new breasts. So she not only had scar tissue in her chest and arms, but she also had incredible scar tissue down her legs that was impeding her ability to walk properly. And again, this was another one of those situations where you know the anatomy, but the physiology is so specific to the person that you find yourself literally inventing new procedures, if I can use that term, on the fly to find out what works and what's going to get the results. And I'm always much more intrigued by what's possible than discouraged by what's not possible.
I like the creativity.
That keeps the 12-year-old in me alive.
Yes. For me, like, for example, I've taught martial arts and, taught a guy with a hook instead of a hand, or someone whose legs didn't work, or who just had a stump. And it was like, oh, this is brilliant, because I had to be really creative with how I was teaching the technique. For me, that was far more interesting. Or I had a student yesterday say, oh, there's someone with a wheelchair user signed up for my workshop. What am I going to do? And my first thought was, that's brilliant. You've got so many more creative opportunities to play with the work now, And
it's somebody who specializes a lot in chronic pain. When you see that light go on for the person, when they become aware of new possibilities, that's when you know that it's going, even if you have some speed bumps and potholes along the way, you know that in general, you're going to have a good success with this person. One of the things that I find quite often is people will come in and I want to know all their aches and complaints. I want them to whine to me. Do I sound whiny? No, you don't. You're just telling me what it's like to be in your body. And then I ask them, well, what do you do for fun? And there's a pause. They hesitate. And then there's this realization of, oh my God, what do I do for fun?
All right.
And then that just puts a little crack in there. And then it's like, okay, what would you like to do if you could? And then they start thinking about the not what they want to get rid of. They think about what they want to bring back in. Mm-hmm. And that becomes a very subtle, much more empowering way to motivate without having to motivate quite so hard, because they begin to self-motivate. Oh, wow, that's right. If I feel better about this, then I can go do that.
Yeah, it's a coaching methodology, essentially.
I'm sure you see that a lot as a coach, yeah?
Yeah, not telling people things, but actually getting them to reveal it and be self-motivated around it by creating it themselves. I mean, the pain thing we should maybe touch briefly back in on then. So my understanding here is that when the fascia kind of solidifies around certain areas, it gets stuck because there's no movement, it's not fluid, then the body actually processes that sort of lack of information as a threat Is that right?
That's a very, very, very good way to put it. There's the mechanisms responsible for that largely are the are the peripheral nerves, the sensory nerves, the ones that give you hot, cold, pressure, pleasure, tactility, all that kind of sensory information. And their domain is the fascial web. So what can happen is when that fascia is damaged, when it's stuck, when it's not sliding, is those peripheral nerve signals change. And, our central nervous system is much more like the old style telephones with wires. The peripheral nervous system is much more like cell phones. They can call anybody they have the number for. And when that signal is damaged, they only know how to call 911. So there's that pain response. And sometimes it's also partially a fear response of if I move it, it's going to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So from a chronic pain standpoint, if I can put my finger politely on that area and I can begin to get them to initiate a little easy motion around it, then we start to talk to that nerve, the sensory nerves in that area. They have some modicum of control because they're involving the process. I'm just not pushing on their tissue. And we start having this conversation without words between their brain, their body, and myself and their nervous system. So you start eliminating that fear factor. You start getting a little more gliding mobility in between those layers that are stuck. And then, hey, that's 20% better than it was when I walked in. They're moving a little better when they walk out. As long as they continue to move, that recapitulates the signals in those areas to turn the volume down on the pain response, to generate more hyaluronin, to get things sliding better. So the therapeutic application sets off a potential effect that lasts beyond the application.
It's funny, so much of this kind of science and geekery and all these different techniques comes back to keep moving.
Yes, keep moving and keep use it or lose it is a biological reality. And keep moving and do what you have to do to keep moving well, with grace, with poise. And it's different for everybody, if it's basketball or ballroom dance, or both.
And you've really seen this whole scene, haven't you? Because as well as, we didn't say this in the introduction, but I read in your bio that as well as doing your own work in your own clinic there, you're also kind of, what would be the word, categorizing or recording, or I forget the word in your bio, but you
documentaryizing,
documenting the conferences and this sort of growing movement. So you're really a hub for this work.
Yeah, I was really, really lucky, Mark. Nothing's ever wasted. So the second time that we went into the lab to do the anatomy trains dissections, the fascial dissections of Tom Myers, the first time was just kind of a test to see, okay, could we dissect it out that way and would it work? And it did. It was part of a larger dissection course that we took over the musculoskeletal part. The second time was, okay, we're spending 6 days. All we're doing is musculoskeletal. Or I should say what we're doing is we're doing fascia dissections based on these anatomy train ideas. And we're going to do them as best as we can. I said, could I bring my video camera? Because they said no video cameras. And I got permission to bring my video camera. And then I started doing more things with the video camera. And then it was, can you come videotape this conference? Can you come videotape that conference? So I started videotaping these scientific conferences and then editing the lectures for content and clarity. So because there's always things that happen in a live situation that necessarily isn't relevant to the people listening at home. And you want to put the slides that they're showing in at the right moments, and you want to have the arrow pointing to the right thing on the slide so the person at home understands it the way you did when you were there. So I got to get all the slides from the presenters. I have like the best bubblegum card collection you could imagine. And I did that for probably close to 10 years. So I just got to take a deep dive into all the science, which admittedly I wanted to learn. But when I was first learning, it was like anything else. You don't know about it. You're learning about it. And I had a front row seat to pretty much all of it.
Where do you think it's going then, this whole sort of fascial world? Is it going to becoming more scientifically legitimized? Is it going to be institutionalized? It does seem to be impacting yoga quite strongly. You know, most yoga people have heard of fascia now in some way. What do you, having sort of tracked this, the big picture of this, where do you think the fashion world is going?
Well, I'm not sure. I know where I want it to go. I know what I'm working towards, which is trying to get it more scientific and medical legitimacy and respectability.
Mm-hmm.
So I do see it going into a more trademarked, branded, dare I use the word gimmicky direction also. And that is of concern to me. Not that there aren't some trademark or branded things out there that are very, very, very good at what they do. But is CBD very big in the UK right now?
Yeah, it's huge. Every shop seems to.
Yeah, so like I don't want to see this rush to fascia like this. Okay, here's the next new thing. It's not fish oil now; it's CBD. And 10 years ago it was this, and 10 years from now it's going to be this other thing. And like most of those things, they're useful in some applications, but not in all the applications that we think they are. I don't need CBD in my shampoo, but I can get it here if I want it.
Caffeine in your shampoo was the last one I saw.
Caffeine in your shampoo?
Yeah, I like it's some sort of macho man shampoo.
Give your hair a buzz?
Yes. So there's all sorts, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's where I don't want to see it go that far in that kind of direction, because then it will lose some of that. It will get that gimmicky quality in terms of the science in the medicine. Now, we have the fascia research project going, or the fascia research society going, which does the biannual fascia research congresses, and they hold to a pretty high standard. They try to keep a level playing field between the scientists and the clinicians, which works pretty well. But they hold pretty high standards. They're really working very hard, and they have some tremendous brains and people on their staff to keep the legitimacy of what they're doing scientifically going. Now, myself, because I'm privileged enough to work in a hospital and in the medical context, I'm moving forward in my direction, both with my first book, but also with the next book that I'm working on, which is called Fascia Function in Medical Applications. Let's just put it right on the cover. And that's being published by a medical textbook publisher, both here in the States and in the UK. And that's coming out in 2020. So that's been my opportunity to pay it forward a little bit and get all these scientists and frankly, and doctors like Carla Stecco, Antonio Stecco, Robert Schleip, to write chapters in their areas of expertise that speak directly to the medical community in the language that they expect to be spoken to say, here's what we felt about the legitimacy of it. So that's where I'm hoping that it goes. So when you go to your doctor with a musculoskeletal complaint, their first response isn't, oh, I think you need surgery, or oh, I think you need PT. It's like, oh, I think you need to go to a Gary or a David, and you need to get that worked on for a couple of visits, see if it improves. If it doesn't, then maybe you do need a joint replacement, or you needed this, or you needed that. And we have a tremendous crisis in this country right now with pain management and people getting addicted to the pain management drugs.
Right, the opiates are a huge problem in the US, isn't it? And there's got to be some alternatives to that aren't addictive and fatal.
Exactly. There are plenty. And I think this could be a huge part of that solution, as long as we move forward, realize that change and progress happens slowly, and keep presenting a strong front with a solid foundation.
Nice. And for teachers out there, yoga teachers, martial artists, what are the sort of not hardcore medical, before we point them to your stuff, is there any names in the field they should know? Like Gil Headley's kind of famous. Is there anyone else in this field that you go, okay, this is someone people should be aware of, or buy their books or watch their videos or anything?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you mentioned Gil Headley. Tom Myers is another one. I don't think enough people, which is the Anatomy Trains developer, I don't think enough people know Robert Schleip, Schleip. He's done a lot of work with fascia in sports and in movement. And the second edition of his book, excuse me, should be coming out in 2020, which I believe is Fascia in Sport and Movement, without going upstairs to look at my library. And you mentioned my book as well. I think there'll be a link to that in the show notes. But that book is also written to be accessible to all professionals, not just people in medicine. But I wanted to, like the title says, fascia, what it is and why it matters. I wanted to give a solid foundation to exactly those key points. So people come away going, oh, okay, now I have the baseline knowledge. Now I can go into the minutia of the particular area that fascinates me the most. And I think that's been one of the missing things in fascial education. It's everywhereness can make writing about it or trying to organize how to think about it a bit unwieldy, because you can go in so many different directions. And without a good roadmap, you're going to get lost or wonder why you went down this detour. But those would be my suggestions.
Great. And I just put fascia book into Google, and yours is the first one that comes up. You'll be glad to know.
Oh my God, that's awesome!
Ahead of the competition, fascia, what is and what it is? It's a black cover, right? Yeah. There we go. With Tom Myers there as well. Great.
Tom wrote one of the introductions. Robert wrote the other one.
Others I recognize, but
in that cover, I want to point out that cover, which is people think is computer generated, but it's a cover. It's a figure of a human being that actually is a life-size sculpture done in mesh wire.
Wow. Yeah, so I'll put a link to the Amazon link in the show notes, as well as your website, which is David, and then it's LESON for November, DAK.com.
Yes, and also fasciamatters.health, HEALTH. And there's actually places there where you can order the book, whatever country you happen to be listening from.
There it is, fasciamatters.health. I didn't sign that one before. Okay, David, closing message, anything you want to finish with here?
Okay. Wow. You cut me to the quick there, Mark. In typical Gemini fashion, I'm thinking of at least two things, if not two more after that.
I'll give you two. As I didn't read your book yet.
Well, I'm thinking about something that my friends Chris and Ann Frederick say a lot, which is stay hungry, stay humble, which I think is a great maxim to live by as a clinician, as a amateur scientist. Is know what you know and feel confident about what you know, but realize that there's always a lot more out there that you don't know. So try to learn as much about that as you can. Be willing to listen to other people's points of views that don't agree with your own, because they might have a point, and don't just react and say, oh, they're wrong, because you might find a missing piece of something that you need in that, and you build bridges that way between disciplines, between people, and stay humble again, because again, you don't know everything, and that's where the being hungry and being humble fit very, very well together.
Stay hungry, stay humble. That's a nice combo. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and all props to Chris and Ann. That hangs above the door to their training facility, and I think it's good words to live by. And I think I'm just going to stay. I'm going to stay with that one.
That's a good place to end, I think, David. David, it's been nice to get to know you. So,
Mark, it's been fantastic.
I feel more energized at the end of this conversation than the beginning, which is always a good sign with a guest.
That is nice. That is a nice feeling. I do too.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So please go there. On the embodifacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodifacilitator.com, you can see the actual links to the sites, post. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodifacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.